Hello guys, and welcome to a video especially targeted towards newer players, but hopefully it could be useful to a lot of different people in terms of min-maxing on how to best understand the champion point system. So obviously, once you reach level 50, what happens is you get things known as champion points, and you can apply these into different trees to give yourself different buffs over time. Now, based on your level, it's going to be easier or harder to level these. So the higher your level is, the harder it is going to be to level these champion points. And the lower your level, the quicker they're going to come. So it all scales higher and higher. Like most games, pretty easy to understand on that front. On that side, I will actually be making a video on how to actually piece together your leveling as a process. So how to level easier, how to level faster, what class are easy to level, where to level, all of that sort of shit in the near future. But this one really is specifically to help you understand the system as a whole in champion points. So first things first, we're going to talk about how some of these trees scale. So you've got a lot of different scaling sources, but more often than not, we're going to have what I call base scaling, which is going to be similar to the Warlord tree. So Warlord tree is about CC break, and I'll explain the different trees in a sec on which are useful. But basically what happens is you're going to have a few percentages you want to be hitting when you're putting points in here. So 13 points will give you 6.11%. There's a lot of different ways of doing that, etc., etc. Here's the deal. This will always round down. So if you are 5.99% in CP, you're only getting 5%. It's really important, be you a new or an experienced player, that you're looking to get a rounded amount of points. Warlord obviously is one of the strongest skills in terms of PvP, and PvE not so important, but still quite useful once you've got a lot of points. This one's basically going to help you reduce CC. So if you are a lower level, then, well, not even if you're low level, whatever you're doing, if you get knocked down to the floor, it's going to let that be a cheaper cost, and it's going to save you a lot of resources. This is obviously going to save you stamina. Bashing is something that you're only going to really want to put points in if you're going to be interrupting a lot, or if you are going to be on a stamina class with one-hand shield, or maybe a magic class with one-hand shield, because a few points in there lets you bash and is going to add a bit of damage at a slightly cheaper cost. The bashing is quite good damage per second. Sprinter is something on any class that you kite, you're going to want some points in there because it scales very generously. So I explained before that Warlord scales normally, which will give you 0.5 a point. Sprinter would give you 0.7 a point, and as we stack that up, it stays the same. So whereas for Warlord we needed 13 to get 6%, we only need 9 here. Now note that obviously for every tree, the more points you put in there, the less you get value per point. So whereas for only 2 points, we might get our 1% mark, when we go all the way up to 56, it's taking us 5 points to get the next spot. So spreading them out is going to give you a better arrangement. So Siphoner, honestly, I wouldn't really advise putting points in here. This isn't very much use. And in this tree, there are no majorly important passives. So I wouldn't worry about hitting any of these 4 passives. This is really a tree that you're only going to put points in if you actually need any of these 3 points. Next tree, I'll start picking it up now that I've explained the basics for you. We are only really looking at the top 3. Tenacity, not too important. I don't know if it's useful on tanking, maybe, who knows. But these are the big ones. Arcanist is Mag Recovery, Mooncalf for Stam Recovery, and Tenacity is going to be for heavy attack resource returns. These are absolutely key for PvE. If you're Stamina, you're going to be stacking a lot of points into Mooncalf and Tenacity, and Magicka, Arcanist, and Tenacity, because it's how you're going to sustain. But these scale resource heavy, so when we put 1 point in, we only get 0.3, and that obviously continues to the point where if we wanted 6%, we would have to put in as many as 23 points. So it's not quite as generous, but it is a stronger tree in general. Again, not many of these passives are that important. If you are going to farm, Master Gatherer can be pretty nice. Synergizer is very nice on Dragon Knights. Outside of that, it's not necessarily that important. Maybe for PvE, I'm not entirely sure. But a really good one to get is Wild Running for PvP, again on a kiting build, because that's going to give you magic recovery. So when I explain these passives, I didn't really say what you got to do. As you can see, it says unlocks at the lover rank 120. So if you have 120 points in the lover, you get this passive. So you just need to try and balance your points out to get that passive if you are interested in it. It is quite difficult to get the 120. It's a lot of investment. Some of them will come accidentally, some of them won't. And obviously, if you're lower CP, don't worry about them for the time being. Just try to keep a good spread of CP. Next tree, this one is very strong for PvP. I'll probably regret saying this because more people will start running it, and that's the last thing I want. But 32 for any build with a heal debuff you want to have in this tree. Only if you're going for a full heal debuff dedicated build would you go more. 32 is just your sweet point. So if you're going to run in-cap, if you're going to run any major defile, even maybe minor, trust me and put 32 points in there because that's your perfect scaling. So you don't really need to know anything about that. If you've got major defile, put 32 in that tree, probably before anything else. Next two trees are very powerful and scale very generously. So we've got Shadow Ward, which is going to reduce block cost, and Tumbling for reduced roll dodge. These are both very good for PvP, a nice way to save sustain. For PvE, less so important, apart from block cost, obviously, for a tank. They're not that bad for PvE, so again, when you get a lot of CP, you will put some in there. Best bit to understand that is maybe check my Magic Blade PvE build. But yeah, just a general spread there. Now, in terms of passives, none of these are that great. But the big one is going to be, bam, this one here, Treasure Hunter, which increases the quality of items you find in treasure chests. A lot of people don't understand how that actually works. So what this actually does is, let's imagine I'm looting a simple chest. So you've got a few chests, simple, intermediate, advanced, master. If I loot a simple chest, it makes it a medium chest. If I loot a medium, it makes it advanced. If I make advanced, it makes it master. And if I loot master, it gives me a chance for a double master, which will give you a chance for more drops. There's a bit more to it than that. It's a bit more complicated, but generally speaking, if you're going to be farming for an item that's from chests, you really want to get points in there. And obviously, if you're going for chests, the other points probably don't matter anyway. So as soon as you have 75 available, it's worth putting some points in there. Next, we're going to go to the blue tree. So blue tree is a really interesting tree, and there's a lot of good spots in here, a lot of good passives. So this is a bit different. Anything Magicka should run at least 30 points, and anything Stamina should run at least 30 points for these two passives here. Perfect Strike for the crit, and Spell Precision for Magic crit. So they're really important to reach as your first goal. It's a bit of a waste not to get it because it's a very little investment to get. That is kind of a point where you're going to be suffering. Next is obviously your normal damage, which is your magic crit damage and crit heals, and base damage, which is your elemental damage, basically. And then you've got penetration. Now, this is exactly the same for stamina in the far tree. So stamina, you'd have penetration, crit damage and heals, crit and penetration. It's pretty much the same process there. You're going to want to stack a good spread in here. So note that Elfborn is going to scale way more generously than Elemental Expert, and the same for Stamina. So you do want to try stack that heavy. If you're a lower CP character, I would suggest focusing on crit once you've reached an early percentage in Elemental Expert. Penetration is where you will often just dump points. So if you say are 6.01% and you had 3 points left, and that would put you on 6.99%. As I explained before, that will still give you 6%. So you'll dump some points in there because otherwise it's a waste of time. Now, when you get to a higher CP, you will start to stack some points specifically into penetration because it is quite good for added damage. But this is more of a min-max thing. I think as a beginner player, I wouldn't worry about it quite as much for the time being. It is important, but not necessarily an early understanding required for that one. The next really important trait in this is going to be Blessed. So Blessed is going to increase your healing. This is your healing done. So this would include healing done to myself and healing done to my group. It's really good on any class for PvP. In PvE, you're not going to touch it in the blue tree at all. You're going to want to go flat damage. So depending on your environment, you're going to stack this differently. And it will also heavily depend on your class. The final one to look out for big time here is going to be Master at Arms. So this increases your direct damage. A lot of people don't understand what that is, so I'll explain. Anything that is not a ground-based AoE is direct damage on the initial cast. Any dot is going to be direct damage on the impact. So let's say I do a normal skill, Flame Lash, Whip, bam, that's direct damage. Let's say I do Embers, which is a dot, bam, dot, 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 dot. The first tick is still direct damage, so it's going to be increasing all of those things. It won't increase the dot. The dot comes in the stamina tree where we see Thaumaturge, and this again is going to be another important tree for amping up the damage over times, and this will be important for PvE. On high CP, you'll almost always see this as number 40 because it scales very well to there. But yeah, it's sort of a balance there. PvP, you have to really decide, do I need it, do I not, based on how many dots you have. It scales very generously, same as Master at Arms, so they're well worth points where possible. Shattering Blows then is an interesting one for PvP. I've had a few expert friends say this truly isn't worth it. There are some circumstances where I have to disagree, but in a generally good damaging build, I wouldn't touch this. If you're low damage, it can be quite nice. What this basically does is enemies with a shield stacked will increase your damage. So again, PvP-wise, it can sometimes be worth points here. And then these two are going to increase your heavy and light attacks with stamina and magical weapons. Now, that's not actually that bad. Putting 3 or 9 points is as much as you're going to want to put in either of those. But light attacks can weigh heavily into damage, and it can sometimes be worth some points in there based on the scenario. What's really interesting about this, unlike this tree where mostly you're only really getting a great passive from spell precision, is this one is packed with good passive. So Repose State is not bad. When you block a melee attack, you have a 15% chance to deal 4,400 physical damage to the enemy. I like it a lot. I will always run that on my DK. I'm blocking a lot, so it does add up a bit of damage over time. Quite nice to put in there. Butcher is another one that's quite good on werewolf-based setups or anything where you're easily reaching it. It's obviously a lot of points to invest, but it's not a bad trait. Increase your damage done with light and heavy attacks by 5%. Below 25. That's really nice on a werewolf. And then Tactician is pretty interesting for some PvP setups, especially if you're using Truth, because off balance, even after some nerfs to it, is quite a good buff, but it more importantly procs Truth, which is a set that gives you a lot of weapon damage when an enemy goes off balance, basically. It's a good passive to get there. So all of those are fairly interesting passives. If you're close to them, I would advise trying to put a couple more points to reach them. If you're not, then don't panic so much. Final tree, passive-wise, we have Exploiter. It's a pretty heavy investment these days. I have not seen anyone really invest for that. 10% damage is a lot, but by the time you put points into there, the scaling can be so ugly you're not really going to get it on Magicka. Stamina, however, you're probably going to get this every time because you're already going to be investing in these 3 trees, so that's probably going to be there pretty quickly. Obviously, I mentioned the crit before. You already need that. This one is not really that important. It's not bad, but you're going to get it anyway. And finally is Last Stand, which is really unimportant completely. Last but not least then is the red tree. So red tree, we have a few sexy trees as well. Ironclad is reducing direct damage. This is the direct counter to Master Arms. Now that's something to note quickly before I carry on. A lot of these trees have direct counters. So you have crit damage and crit resistance. You have direct damage and direct resistance. It's true for all of the trees, apart from a very select few. So, although a lot of people might tell you CP is really unbalanced, they're talking out their arse. It really is not that bad. When you actually learn to understand how to min-max CP and get the best by making sure you're getting the best rounding on all your numbers rather than wasting points, you're actually just going to completely counter yourself, so it's fine. The CP system is really good for customizing build and can open a lot of options. Anyway. Ironclad then is your direct damage. So again, you're going to want to stack that heavy. If possible, there's a lot of skills that will register as direct damage. Pretty much every ultimate is direct damage, if not all of them. Well, not the ground ones, but like any hard hitting. So for PvP, this is a very important tree. For PvE, not often that important. But yeah, you want to keep a good spread in this area for PvE. So Spell Shield is not actually going to be something you touch for PvP, but for PvE it can be well worthwhile. Because there's not that many places as a damage dealer that you're going to take damage, or as a healer that you're going to take damage, it's quite a good way to mitigate damage from sort of AoEs and things. You do get a fair bit of resistance from that, it adds up quite nicely, so for PvE it's a decent treat. This again will scale similar to dump trees, so what I mean by a dump tree, like resistant, is it's got a flat value rather than a percentage. Resistant then is a dump tree that is very powerful for PvP. It's going to give you critical resistance. Probably the most important tree for you in terms of PvP and PvE and all, because it's going to reduce the damage you're taking from so many skills. Even a low crit build is probably going to be 30% crit. High crit build 60% plus. And a normal build is going to be somewhere around 45 to 50. So when they've got dots on things, you're pretty much always taking crit damage. It's a big damage saver to have crit resistance. I'll probably explain some stuff like that when I make a guide to Cyrodiil for beginners. This tree then has some interesting passives as well. The bash is obviously a bit rubbish, but not terrible. You're going to reach that anyway pretty easily, so I would always just suggest getting it. Roll dodge is going to increase your resistance. It's obviously pretty crap, but this one here is going to be the best passive of any tree in my opinion, and you have to get it in every PvP build pretty much. So when you take critical damage, you heal for 322. Now, battle scaling, again, something I'll explain when I go for beginner PvP, is going to reduce that by half, which only 166 is a tiny heal, but it's got no cooldown. And when you think about how much times you take crit damage, that adds up extremely quickly and is a really good passive to get in PvP. Reinforced is another really crap tree. We're not going to fuss about that too much. 2 trees to go. So we've got the Lady. The Lady is going to be a pretty easy tree to understand. It's pretty much just about Hardy, Elemental Defender, and Fixed Skinned. This is reducing dot damage, scales very generously. Hardy and Elemental Defender, like your base damage, are rubbish scaling, but still worth the points because it's flat damage reduction. Very simple here, just keep a spread, but note that if your stamina, it's well worth getting 120 because this passive is the all-round strongest in the passives. When you use break free, the cost of your next stamina ability used within 5 seconds is reduced by 80%. You can imagine that's quite a big resource save in terms of PvP, right? There's a lot of expensive skills that you're going to use after breaking. Really, really strong passive to get. Critical Leech then is a pretty poor one, not much of a heal. Spell Absorption is not very important either. And then Bulwark is a really good passive that is well worth it if you ever run a one-hand shield or a Frost Staff. It's going to give you a lot of resistance free of charge, so make sure you've got 30 points there. If you are a beginner, you're really low CP, as soon as you get 30 points, probably this should be your first priority if you're obviously running those weapons. Final tree then is going to be the Lord. This is where we're going to see our other source of healing, so quick recovery, or in the case of shield stacking builds. So there are classes where, like Sorcerer, Magic Nightblade, you use damage shields rather than flat heal. We go into Bastion, which by the way scales very nicely compared to quick recovery. This is just your general survivability. Expert Defender, not really worth the points. Heavy Armor Focus, not really worth the points. And then the passives, that one's rubbish. This one is fairly rubbish unless you're in a big group. Revival is not that bad if you're in a large group. It's a lot of points to invest. I just don't think you're going to ever hit that. And you're never going to get 120 points in this tree. So, yeah, I think that sort of explained the CP. I hope that helps some newer players. Maybe some of those passives were worth understanding for some older players. I don't know. I'll see you guys in the next video. Next video will be the leveling guide. That might be out today as well. I don't know yet, but we'll see. Enjoy the video, guys. I'll see you in the next, and peace.